forget to do that because I seem to forget to do all these little tech things. So for people who are just now joining us on Facebook, that I'm going to give it a few minutes. And so I'm going to fill a little bit of airtime so you don't miss any of the conversation here this evening. For you watching, Warwick's, just so you know, is I have a feeling most people know who we are here in San Diego, but for anybody that's joining us from outside the San Diego area, we are located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. We have been in business, as my sign says, since 1896. So while we are not the oldest bookstore in the country, we are the oldest continuously family-owned bookstore in the country. Nancy Warwick is the 4th generation owner. So family-owned, female business owner. It's all got all those wonderful things. Legacy here in San Diego for bringing wonderful author events to everybody. So Katherine, thank you for being with us, and Shruti as well. And joining them tonight is Tamera and David, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute to tell you what they'll be talking about too. We're going to be putting Katherine's book into the comment section. So Warwick's is open for business. We would love to see you if you're in the San Diego area. We would love to see you come by the store. Nothing better than shopping not only for Kathy and Shruti's books, but also, you never know what else you're going to discover there. And there is a holiday around the corner called Valentine's Day. Although if you don't have a Valentine, do that self-love thing and, buy yourself something. It's nothing better than me shopping. I am an expert at me shopping. And so Warwick's has a wonderful other side of the store that has wonderful gifts and jewelry and fine pens and great greeting cards. So we've got something for everybody there. Also tonight, if you have a question or comment, please feel free to put that into the comment section. We won't bring those in live into the discussion, but we will, I'll bring that in after Kathy and Shruti have their discussion. We're going to start off tonight, though, with a discussion and some information from Tamera Kohler, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Regional Task Force on the Homeless. And joining her is David Baker. And David is an affordable housing activist and program director for the Housing Our Youth Collaborative. He uses lived experience as a homeless youth to guide the design and continuous quality improvement of youth-serving organizations across the nation. His approach involves exercising compassion, acceptance, awareness, validation, and empowerment in every facet of system design. David's story is an example of what can be attained with hope and a desire to see a positive change in the world. So Tamera and David, I'm going to give the floor to you both to chat for a few minutes. So Tamera, take it away.
Well, thank you. I am just thrilled to be here. I think this is an amazing event. The Regional Task Force on Homelessness serves San Diego County. And if you think about San Diego, it's a population of about 3.5 million people. And we know on any given night, we have a minimum of about 7,500 individuals experiencing homelessness in San Diego, nearly half of them unsheltered. We also know in the state of California, we have on a minimum 150,000 individuals experiencing homelessness on any given night. This has really been highlighted, and the high risk of being homeless in a COVID response under a pandemic. So I think this is timely and important. Our organization doesn't deliver direct services. We actually lift up the data, work with elected officials, work with the service providers. We set policy, best practices, we fund programs. We really set the framework around how to have a strong homeless system that is focused on ending homelessness. Although the numbers may seem scary, it's also important to know that homelessness is not a permanent condition. It is a solvable problem. It is a lack of housing and nothing more. It is a failure of systems, not personal failures. And it is an approach to not having enough housing that people can afford. So our work is always to lift up the importance of having enough housing resources, supporting our service providers, which David represents, and really understanding, even in those big numbers, are significant individual stories about people who many times have had traumatic experiences, making the best of the choices they had, not bad choices, and doing all that they can to survive in these conditions. I am always honored to do this work. I am fiercely driven to end homelessness. And I challenge anybody who is watching that I want you to have the opportunity, as you hear from Kathy, the importance that we see, that we acknowledge and we learn and we value everyone and the need of having housing. And I can't express our commitment more than through the work we do of not only our board members, but those that have lived experience as well. And so I'm going to actually turn my time to David, who emulates all of that. I'm honored to have him here with me. And David, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tamera. And thank you, Julie, for that beautiful introduction. I feel like you gave me a little too much credit there. No, I'm joking, but super honored to be here and just sort of share a bit about the homeless perspective, right? I love that, Tamera, the way you framed up the conversation. You know, it's people aren't necessarily homeless, it's that they're experiencing homelessness, right? And that it's a temporary condition. And it's definitely something that can be solved with the right amount of dedication and commitment from the community, right? And each of us sort of play different roles. We've got Tamera, who's leading an entire sort of regional task force, and we've got folks like myself who are, you know, heading up programs to serve those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And then we have everyone at home who plays their role. It could be something as simple as a bit of compassion, right, on the sidewalk, or it could be something, you know, of course, donating to your local YMCA, which is where I'm working. Joking, but just sort of taking yourself and empathizing with these individuals. It's sort of easy to brush off some of our folks experiencing homelessness and go back into our lives and continue as if it's something that doesn't exist. But as Tamera said so eloquently, it does exist. It's not as scary as we thought. I can promise you that. And I use myself as an example of the potential, right, of the opportunity. Once these folks are given the opportunity to step into more stable conditions and situations, there's no telling. Some of our favorite celebrities have experienced homelessness. The Rock, right? How many people love The Rock out there? I hope some heads are nodding. But you know, this is something that doesn't last forever. And just to not share too much about Kathy's book, but I can say there are details inside of this book that are so close to the homeless experience that I almost would assume that Kathy has some experience herself, perhaps. The details that are included, the connections, the stories, the experiences, so real. So thank you all for having me. And of course, we'll be sticking around and answering more questions, but I'll toss it back to you, Julie.
Oh, David, thank you. And I invite David to put in the comment section your organization. If anybody would like to donate, we are here to do that too. So we are okay with asking for that kind of thing to happen. Any kind of help that we can provide to lift up voices, we are here for. So David's going to put some information into the comment section, which I think is fantastic. So thank you for that. So Tamera and David, I'm going to ask you to turn your cameras off. We will see you at the end when we get back to Q&A. So thank you for that. So earlier I forgot to thank Algonquin and Michael and Kelly and everybody at the team for allowing us to host you, Katherine and Shruti. So I wanted to thank them, and also to Karen and Beth for putting us together with Tamera and David. So it definitely takes a lot of people to make these things happen. And so we appreciate everybody in doing that. So Katherine Seligman is a journalist and author who lives in San Francisco. She has been a writer at the San Francisco Chronicle magazine, a reporter at the San Francisco Examiner, and a correspondent at USA Today. Her work has appeared in Redbook, Life, Money, California Magazine, the anthology Fresh Takes, and elsewhere. She's here tonight to talk about The Edge of Hate. With her this evening is Shruti Swamy, the winner of 2 O. Henry Awards, whose work has appeared in the Paris Review, the Kenyon Review Online, Prairie Schooner, and elsewhere. In 2012, she was Vassar College's 50th W.K. Rose Fellow and has been awarded residencies at the Malay Colony for the Arts, Blue Mountain Center, and Hedgebrook. With that, I'm going to toss it to you, ladies, and we will see you in about a half hour or so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kathy, I was wondering, and thank you so much for having me to talk to you today about your beautiful book. I was wondering if you'd be able to read a little bit for us to start us off, and then I'll have a bunch of questions.
Great. I will do that. And thank you so much. It's to be here with you too, as well. Fellow Algonquinian, if that's a word. And I'd like to start by reading a short passage from the beginning that sort of sets up at the beginning of the book, where main character Maddie comes across the scene of a murder. I knew I would see it for the rest of my life. Whenever I closed my eyes, he would be there, his life leaking out on the ground. Maybe it was true what my stand-in of a mother had said. You are going to end up damaged goods. I couldn't help copying her voice. You're going to be sorry, I said to Root and pulled him away from the kid. I wanted to put my hand on his chest to see if it was moving, but I couldn't get myself to do it. My heart was banging against my chest. Who was I going to scream for? Ash and everyone else. They wouldn't hear me. Root startled and growled with his mouth closed, a slow, deep rattle he made when he knew he was on guard. We both looked over at a man standing at the edge of the clearing. He could have been there the whole time waiting, or maybe he'd walked in right after us. He was a head taller than me, and his black and gray hair was pushed back into a stringy ducktail. I had a sweatshirt hood pulled up over my head, so nothing about me stood out. But Root was something you'd remember. He looked like he'd been sewn together, his face soft Labrador, the rest some short, wide pit bull creation. The man stuck his hands in the pockets of his camo pants and stared at us. I tried to stare back, but all I could do was reach for Root, who moved from a muffled growl to an all-out bark. I didn't usually make people nervous, but the man shifted back and forth, crunching sticks and leaves under his boots, which made Root bark louder. The man lunged forward, then stopped, like he'd forgotten something. I thought how easily he could come after me. No one would know. I'd be lying there next to the kid, and the cops would think we'd done it to each other. Keep a handle on the fucking dog, he said, wiping what looked like blood on his forehead. I could tell he was used to ordering people around. I scrambled across the uneven dirt and past some trees until I had to bend in half and gulp air. I listened for the man, but all I could hear was my own quick breath, or maybe it was his, or the wind. I couldn't tell what was real. The carpet of yellow and brown leaves where I stood looked too bright. They smelled sweet, but rotten. When I straightened up, my muscles were ready for more, but I couldn't do it. The loop had started playing in my brain of the kid on the ground and the look in the man's eyes. I knew something about getting away. I'd been doing that most of my life, but not like this. No one had tried to stop me when I left the house where I'd lived longer than anywhere else. They had no idea where I was, standing in a park hundreds of miles away alone in a whole different way. Root whined softly, and I put a finger sternly to my lips as if he'd know what that meant. Quiet, I mouthed. No one was coming to help. I could run through the park all the way to the ocean, but then where would I go? I turned toward the other direction, which led back to the street, and my body took over, and I was running again, pretending I was someone who knew what she was doing.
Thank you so much for that, Kathy. I love that you picked that. Obviously, it's the beginning of the book, but it sets up so nicely what this book does really beautifully, which is giving this very visceral, real, lived experience. It's very hard to put down. I found it incredibly compelling, and when I put it down, I was like, "Oh, what's going to happen next?" Of course, we're also so pulled in both by this immediate murder, the just the lived experience of the protagonist's daily life and her past and how she got to this place. So I just wanted to start by asking, I know you're a journalist and you've reported on homelessness for many years, and I was curious to know what compelled you to explore this subject fictionally?
Good question. I have been a journalist for a while. I've lived in the middle of Haight-Ashbury for over 20 years and been based here in my writing. And I had written about homelessness here and elsewhere, but when this particular story came up, I felt like I couldn't do it as nonfiction because the seed of it comes from something that actually happened, which is a night about 10 years ago when my husband and I were driving through the park, and a man threw himself in front of our car and pleaded with us to stop and said someone was trying to kill him. And when the police came, they shined a light into the distance, and there was this body of a kid who was gasping for his last breath. And there was an investigation, but ultimately let the killer go because there hadn't been any real witnesses. I hadn't seen what happened. I couldn't say anything. Besides, he looked really agitated and kind of out of it. But the cop said to me when I asked, well, what's going to happen? He said, if you ask me, neither of these guys were up to any good. And I couldn't get that night out of my mind. And so I did do a lot of research, looking up court records and trying to look up the background of these people. But I found that wasn't what I wanted to write about. I did want to write about the sort of unknown lives of people we pass.
Oh, that's really, wow, that's really incredible and intense where that story started for you. I'm wondering if you wanted to talk about, I was feeling like one of the questions that kept coming up when I was reading this book was this question of what do we owe to each other? And I feel like that's a question that you can ask in any relationship between these characters. Maddie, the main character, what does she owe to her friends who become kind of her family, and particularly Ash, who she becomes very close to? What does she owe to Shane, the murder victim at the beginning, and Shane's family? What did they owe to her? And and of course, we as readers are implicated in this book too, as we're looking into these people's lives. We're wondering what do we owe to people who are experiencing homelessness? So I wondered if there was a central question, if it was that question or a question that you started with, a central question, and how your relationship to that question developed over time as you were writing the book.
Yeah, that is sort of at the heart of the book, actually, because I personally always had this feeling, not that I've been in this situation that long, but if you are with someone the moment they pass from life to death, you have a connection to them. And so that's part of the reason I couldn't let it go, because I really felt, and I say somewhere in the book, there is a mention of that the father who comes looking for his son who died in the park says to Maddie, you have to tell me about my son and how did his life end up like this? Because you were with him when he died, and that means something. And I really, that's something I sort of believe. So with that in mind, I did start thinking about what do I owe my fellow humans who I pass every day. And I think it's sort of naturally, I've always been someone who walks down the street and thinks, what's going on in that window? Like, it looks like that guy's sitting down for dinner. What would it be like if I was the other person sitting across from him at dinner? So I sort of have that instinct anyway. And it just occurred to me how little we know about the people we pass. And over the years, I have talked to so many kids, primarily kids, young people who've been passing through, but this put it in a whole different, a sense of immediacy and really wanting to know about people's lives. So I really tried to delve into that. And I do think there's a limit to what we can know about anyone who we pass, even in our own house. I mean, how well can we know our children? How well can we know our parents? Our children don't see us as people. We don't see them as people. How do we see the people we pass on the street as people with stories, with lives? And I really wanted to, that's what drove me while I was writing the book. So yeah, I do think in a way, we do owe that to each other to look beyond the surface to try to know stories of each other.
Yeah, that's really resonant what you say. I think one of the most devastating parts of the book is Shane's parents really grappling with, who was Shane? What was my son? My son, that this is the person that I grew up with, that, you know, I saw him grow up, but did I really know him and what his life was like? And the unknowability of that is so powerful and devastating. I was wondering if you'd want to talk about, I think you live in the HAIGHT. Do you live in the HAIGHT?
I do, right? Yes.
Yeah, so
I do.
This book is very much set in San Francisco, and even more specifically set in the HAIGHT. And I was just wondering why, like what it felt like to be inhabiting the world, like the real world, as you were writing it fictionally, and if there were things that you were observing as you were living, you know, in the neighborhood that made it into your work or influenced your work, and vice versa.
I did talk to a number of people sort of in depth about what their experience had been like, and they were so generous in talking to me. And that's another thing. I mean, if you bother to stop to talk to people, I did with one of them. I did go through an agency, a wonderful agency that worked in the city, and they referred me to somebody who had been on the streets for 2 years. And so I really could get a lot of perspective from her. But I did sort of walk through the streets, trying to look at it in a different way than I had looked at it in the past. And I have, over the years, I had volunteered at a family shelter that was in the neighborhood. And so that, helping someone run a women's group there, and the women were pretty young. And that helped also give me perspective. But I did feel like I got very involved and sometimes over-involved. I tried not to get over-involved when I was talking to people, and try to get into their lives in a way that was intrusive. I really, I had to pull myself back from doing that. So you realize that people you walk through and it's their living room. And so they didn't intend for you to walk through their living room, and you didn't intend for them to hear their conversations when your window is open. I think things have really changed since the pandemic, because kids pretty much are not coming through as much as they were, or have accepted offers to leave or to live with someone, and finding sort of more despair on the street now than ever before. And that's sort of been hard. I've gotten way over involved in that, just seeing people on the street who need things. So trying to, I try not to get too involved. There was a woman fairly recently who was living right on my street, a few doors down, in her car with 9 dogs. And she was just such a kind woman. And she'd had 3 dogs, and one of them had puppies, and she's just living in this car with her dogs. And there's every kind of story you can imagine out there. And so yes, I did. I did start to see things differently.
Yeah, I do feel like that's one thing, that this is a world that to many people is invisible, and that it's laid completely upon the geography of the world that is visible to a lot of us. But just the systems, the daily lives of, you really track what a day in the life looks like. So that would mean like waking up before the cops come at 4 a.m, in the park, so that you don't get cited for camping. You can say that you're just hanging out, or when you get in line to the shelter, things like that, that this is really something that's very occupying your whole day. And this is something that we just don't see if we're not looking for it, and if we're not like living it. So I was wondering, I know that representing a marginalized group, and this is a very marginalized group of people who are experiencing homelessness, it's a really tricky and demanding task, and it requires, so one thing this is kind of a two-part question. I was wondering if you wanted to tell me a little bit about your research process, and I know you've talked about it a little bit, but if there's anything you want to add about that. And I also was wondering what felt important for you to get, what was the most important thing for you to get right?
As far as the research, I went to the places I was writing about and talking to the kids, and also the police who in my neighborhood. Just a little background for those of you who don't know the HAIGHT as this historic neighborhood that was made famous by the Summer of Love and the hippie movement, and a lot has changed since then, but it's still a magnet for people coming through. A lot of kids, a lot of displaced people who have nowhere else to go, but seekers and dreamers and people who are following various bands still come through, and they expect to see the HAIGHT from the 1960s and 70s, and they find a very different place. So I tried to talk to as many people as I could. And the police in this neighborhood, although the kids say they're so used to getting hassled, they have an outreach team who function more as social workers really than as police. And they don't want to arrest the kids, most of them. And so I did spend time, they were also very generous in talking. And I went to the court, and in looking up records and sitting through court sessions with other kids who'd been arrested and seeing how they were treated and what their answers were to the whole court system, going to the emergency room where I had been as a reporter, but it was sort of different trying to be there as experiencing it and just seeing what it was like. And some of that I cut out. It was interesting because my editor said, "This is so wild." I mean, I realized it was sort of too much, but actually a lot of the things that I had, written about actually happened, but they just sounded so wacky in the emergency room, people just bringing in all kinds of things and family members and fights. And so it was extraneous, but I did get into this, as they call the research rapture, where you're finding out so much stuff, and it's not, to turn it into fiction. And the thing that was most important to me to get right was Maddie's voice. And it was a big decision to, as in your own work, going between first person and third person, you're making a conscious decision about how you want to use voice. And so I did really think a lot about how to get to her voice and what to do to make it seem authentic. So that was really a lot of playing around with point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also wanted to ask, Maddie and her friends are really young. Maddie's 20 years old, and most of her friends seem to be that age. And I was curious, it's funny because they are so well-versed in what they need to do in order to survive each day, like in terms of what to avoid, where to go to get food and all those things. But actually they haven't been on the streets for that long, like a couple of years or something. And I was wondering what compelled you to choose to focus on young people and the experience of young people and people who actually maybe are relatively new. At least Maddie seems to be relatively new to this life.
I chose young people because that is primarily who comes through this neighborhood. In San Francisco, as you know, we have such a visible and large population of homeless people or people who are in unstable housing, and the populations vary around the city wherever you go. And in the HAIGHT, we just have so many kids. I call them kids, but they're anywhere from 18 to 30 who have been kicked out of their homes or have left because of some kind of trauma, or they're travelers. That's how they refer to themselves, as we're travelers. So that's why I chose young people. I just thought it really fit with the neighborhood. And they so expected to find this old-fashioned hate ethic of tolerance. And one of the kids did say to me once, I was asking him why he came to the HAIGHT, and he said, everybody comes to the HAIGHT. You know, he was actually from Orange County. And he said, everyone comes here, man, you know, and if you can't find something to eat here in the HAIGHT, if you're hungry here, then you are really doing something wrong. So that it has this legacy, which is not altogether intact right now, anywhere in the city.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned the woman with her 9 dogs, and I wanted to ask you about Root. I was wondering if you were a dog person. And I had a lot of questions about Root. I was wondering how Root came into the book. That relationship between him and Maddie, Root is the dog. That relationship between him and Maddie is a very important relationship to her, maybe even more important than some of the other relationships in the book, because it is so central to her. It is so stabilizing and gives her so much of a sense of purpose and agency. So I just wanted to talk about the importance. Of course, there's another animal in the book named Tiny. Actually, two animals. But Tiny's a little mouse that's kept as a pet by another character. So I wanted to talk about pets and why they figured in your work, and if that came from research or if you just really love dogs.
Well, I do. I had my first dog shortly after I started writing this. We got a family dog, and I do like dogs, and so many of the kids have dogs or other animals. You know, as long as I've lived here, I've seen, there was a guy who used to have a chicken that he kept under his hat, and then he had it on a leash, and the chicken was very real to him. There was another guy who had a rabbit, and a young woman who did have a Root, and a rat, much like Tiny. And she kept it in her sleeve of her sweater, actually. And she taught it to drink juice out of little juice boxes, little mini straws. So anyway, and Maddie had Root, primarily because so many of the kids do have dogs, but also because he provides a relationship for her that is so unthreatening. She doesn't have to worry about him ever betraying her or turning on her or not returning her affection. So she's free to really be who she is. So it sort of opened up a side of her where we could see who she really was. And despite the fact that she had so many defenses that she used against almost everyone in her life, including these kids who are like a family, and the young man, Ash, who she has a romantic interest in, she really trusts Root. And so she can be with him in a way that she couldn't with other people. So, and I think that's really true. I mean, you see so many people and the woman who lived in the car, there's no way she was thinking of giving up her dogs. I mean, she had actually said she was so upset that people were upset with her because the dogs were barking, the puppies were barking. She said, they're all adopted out, you know, so they all have homes. So people should just give me time to adopt. Anyway, but you see a lot of pets and love between people and their pets on the street.
Yeah, I've also noticed that as well. Okay, so I have time for one more question, then we're going to open it up to questions for the audience. I have so many. Which one am I going to pick? Well, I think I'll ask. So on the back of your book, your beautiful book, I'll just hold it up because I don't know if anybody has yet, this beautiful book. There's a beautiful quote by Mesha Marin. Actually, I don't see it on the back of your book, but I see it somewhere. So she says, never have I seen a character so defined by her deep dualism, an electric desire to be both invisible and seen, free and bonded. So I wanted to talk about the tension between the invisibility of Maddie, the invisibility of the condition of homelessness that's making her invisible in some ways to people, and other ways very visible to people. People are taking pictures, tourists are sometimes taking pictures of people who are experiencing homelessness. So there's kind of like a way of seeing that's very flattening. Photography and looking and seeing does also play another kind of role in the book without giving anything away. So I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts on in that tension between being invisible, seeing, looking, and being seen, if that makes sense. Is that too jumbled?
No, it totally makes sense. And it also goes to the heart of the book, really, because she does have a desire to stay hidden and to hide her secrets. Because she's been traumatized, but she also feels that if people know her secrets, they're gonna, they won't want her the same way her family didn't want her. So she desperately wants to remain unseen. And yet she does want connections. She does want to have relationships with people. So there is an incredible tension between that. And she does have feelings for the dead kids' parents who come out and really want to force their help on her. She fights it, and she definitely doesn't want to go off with them and be a replacement for their child. But she has this feeling of not wanting them to see her, but wanting them to see her, and what it would be like if they saw her. And I do think that, I think that's sort of a universal feeling for a lot of people. And I was a kind of a bookish kid who spent a lot of time in my room and felt unseen. And so some of it came to me naturally. Of course, I had a home, but I do think that that's something that so many people on the street go through is, they have secrets they don't necessarily want you to know, but on the other hand, there they are right in front of you. So yeah, there's a theme.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, I'll turn it over to Julie.
There we go. We've got some questions coming in. So I want to invite Tamera and David back onto the screen too right now, because we have some questions for both of you as well. So hello, David. Hello, Tamera. So Tamera, I'm going to start with the one that's for you. And this is, what systematic challenges do you see in policymaking and action plan that makes homelessness a persistent social reality? Big question.
Yeah, that's a bit. Yeah, that's as people say, not a soup question. That's a big question.
That's a big question.
Especially when we talk policy. But I think one of the challenges, policy is not the hardest part. It's getting the bigger system that funds things to invest deeply and richly in housing that is affordable, especially we're in Southern California, right? So affordable housing in Southern California is sort of like the unicorn, right? It is
same with San Francisco. It's like I'm
yeah,
San Francisco
say, right? Yeah. And so I think part of the challenge is understanding that where great prosperity is, we also have a great deficit of housing that's affordable for individuals. And really, I think the policies follow public support. And so really, I think it's time for us to really look at, as a nation, as people, are we actually comfortable with this? And when people walk past and do not see that individual, they're saying they're comfortable with it. And I think there's a challenge to that, right? So what I love about Kathy's book is really digging into someone and really that leading question of kind of seen and unseen. We choose not to see them, but we view them very differently. They're actually seen for negative things and not the positive that exists there. And policy is only as good as communities on a level where they'll allow zoning, they'll allow us to cite things, they'll allow us to house things. People will employ people with, different and challenging backgrounds, whatever they may be. And I think ultimately a policy of understanding that homelessness it's a recovery process. Stability in housing takes some time. So being willing to invest appropriately and having the backing of individuals that what it really takes. I think a lot of times when you're asking for money, and then David at a nonprofit, we always are kind of asking for those funds. We're under-resourced in a lot of ways, but we're also under-resourced in understanding that we're behind. And so we're going to need to put some resources up front. That means capital. We need to have this in all of our neighborhoods. And if we can do that, we'll actually do more prevention work over time instead of addressing it when it gets to a point of concentration that we're uncomfortable with. So policy work is not the hardest. Public understanding, public perception, reducing stigma and shame that comes around, all of that is the heavier lift.
Mm-hmm. And the cost of housing is just such a huge one. I mean, that is just it in a gigantic nutshell for California.
And I think understanding that it's usually a traumatic event that causes the homelessness, right? So many people are just hanging on to that bottom rung. Right. Doubled up, barely making it, living paycheck to paycheck, one traumatic event, it's a house of cards. And then getting back into affordable housing, especially if you've been evicted, is a tough slug.
Yeah, can't even imagine. David, this question is for you. And if it's too personal, feel free to deflect. But based on your lived experiences as a homeless youth, what were your greatest fears and what inspired you the most?
Wow, that's a great question. Seems like we have some informed listeners here. So my greatest fear, I would say, I can identify with the fear of being woken up by the sheriff or by police, right? That's, as a young man of color, that's kind of not an ideal encounter. And it's something that could go wrong so fast. I can say I've been in situations where I haven't necessarily had anything illegal in my possession, but maybe I'm sleeping in an area where there is, illegal things, right? And if the question comes up of whose is this, well, now I either have to be the tattletale or I have to be the one going to jail, right? And damaging my background. So that was honestly kind of one of the main things that, I was concerned with, just being around people who I grew up with, right? Are you all going to engage in something illegal that could put me at risk? So many different things, but just so much fear. I can say the chronic stress that comes with being homeless, even waking up in the morning and having to prepare for school. I was a college student when I was experiencing homelessness. So, worrying about how the world sees you, worrying about how your peers see you. And that's one thing that's so sort of unique about youth homelessness is that, youth don't generally look as homeless as we like to envision them, right? So we have youth who are couch surfing, and like Tamera said, we have youth who are just one event away from homelessness. I can say during COVID, I've experienced a ton of youth where their grandmother was their only support, and then COVID came and took their grandma away, and now they've got a younger sibling who they have to adopt essentially or get guardianship over. So there are so many different fears that come with that instability. But as far as inspiration, I am inspired by so many people, so many things. One kind of a blessing that comes with, coming from a background of poverty is that it doesn't take much to get you excited, right? I was always the kid who, I had the minimalist toys and, so it allowed me to kind of develop this perspective on the world. But if I were to have to pinpoint one thing that inspired me, I'd have to say just the people. And the generosity and the compassion that I received. I moved into a transitional living program that was extended to me by grace, right? I would have remained a homeless youth and I may not have been able to pull myself out without the help of others and my community and that wraparound support and folks like Tamera to highlight my story and help me get into these positions where I can advance my career, right? So that human connection, those are the things that definitely inspire me and keep me rolling. And when I meet young people who are in these kind of dark places, I remind them, hey, I've been there. And guess what? It took someone like me to help me get out of there. It took trust. It took, a little bit of vulnerability. So That's pretty much in a nutshell, Julie.
And trust and vulnerability are those two very hard things. It's very hard to let yourself be open to trusting somebody. So for sure. Okay, so this question is for both Katherine and Shruti. So Shruti, we're going to start with you on the answer of this, but it's for both of you. So how does it feel when you have written the last page of your book and the story is done? How do you transition to your next project? So Shruti, I'll let you answer that one first.
Oh, that's a great question. I finished my novel, but it's so funny, Kathy. I wonder if you've had this experience too, where you finish your novel by somebody physically just taking it away from you because you could fix it forever. You just have to, at some point, you're just like, it's done. So I have no idea. You just have to cut yourself off. And then I often have a fallow period after I'm done with a project where I just try and read and be quiet and walk around and pay attention and wait until something else comes. And I've developed a way to be more comfortable with that fallow period. It's kind of hard sometimes. You feel like you always want to be productive, but also honoring those periods between projects and between inspiration to just recharge and pay attention, to be awake in the world. So your next project comes. I found that to be really important.
Super important to have that downtime to reflect. It's really important for that. How about you, Katherine?
Well, I think it's hard to know when you are finished. I agree that you do have to have somebody say, hey, taking that thing away from you.
The deadline's here.
I have, completely rewritten it 50 more times. So I think that's a really hard thing to know. And yeah, you don't know you're done until someone tells you you're done. And I would ask people that question, and I would, that's pretty much what people say. And as when I finished, I was a little bit sad because I'd gotten so attached to the character that I was sort of thinking, where'd she go? Mm-hmm. And so much so that I sort of thought about, I have been at work on rewriting a previous novel, and I thought, maybe I'll have her be a character in that novel. And I mentioned that to a friend who's a writer, and he said, everybody thinks that, but don't do that. That's a bad idea. But I think, I just got attached, and so it's just having a time away from it and just to think and just be is a good thing to do.
Okay, David, this one is for you. Did you find this book to be both? This is going to put you on the spot here a little bit, David, in respect to Katherine. So did you find this book to be both true and empathetic to people experiencing homelessness?
That's a great question. One thing I can say, I didn't read the entire book, but from the parts that I read, I was thinking to myself the entire time, I know a youth right now who's going through this right now, right? When we talk about the bond between a youth and their animal, 2 weeks ago, I paid a vet bill for a youth who, was on the edge because their dog had been diagnosed with a tumor. And, I can say so many of those experiences, but specifically that relationship and that support between youth. And of course, when we think of family, we always go to people, but those pets often fill those voids. So the accuracy, the entire time that I was reading, I thought Kathy may have been a homeless youth herself. There's so many of those things that are almost sort of invisible to the world that are highlighted in this work. And I can say accurate 100%. Even so accurate to the point where this could be, my cousin or my mother even, right, who've had these experiences, the fear that's translated through this messaging and the wording and the journeys that are, so much of it, Julie, so much of it.
Excellent. Well, that's about all we have time for. I'm going to leave it to anybody have a burning question that they want to ask any of you. I don't want to leave anybody out of within this room of asking something if you would like. So I'll just kind of throw that out there. If you want to say something, let me know or ask away.
Well, I want to do one thing before we go, just to say, I loved Shruti's book.
I put that in the comment section too.
Yeah, but I just wanted to hold it up and say, actually, some of the same, you can tell that it was the same house that designed the cover, but it's the same, a lot of vibrancy, but the stories are wonderful. And I just want to, say, don't leave without a copy of her book.
Excellent. Well, Shruti, do you have social media or a website that people can go to find you?
My website is just my first name and my last name.com, shrutiswamy.com.
And they can find all your social handles from
everything. There. Yeah, I only have Twitter, and I'm terrible at it. So,
Katherine, how about you? Do you engage in the social channels?
Well, I have a website as well, KatherineSeligman.com, and I'm easily findable on social media. And I would join Shruti in saying I'm, not great at it, but I'm there and learning. So
excellent. And David, somebody put in the information about the transitional housing in the comment section. Is there any other website or anything that you want to direct people to for anything? Is that it?
That's definitely it as far as programs go. But if folks want to follow me on Twitter, I can get that dropped in the chat as well.
What is it, real quick?
At the Change Baker. And then if you want to check me out and kind of keep an eye on my journey, my website is changebaker.com. Feel free to check me out there as well.
Make sure you drop that in the comments too.
Drop those in the comments.
Excellent. And Tamera, is there any place that people should go that is a good website that you can tell people about?
So, we are really that infrastructure. It's rtfhsd.org. But I would also encourage people to educate themselves at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So they also have a good website for information. And I just want to say thank you to Kathy for adding voice and the thought process of people experiencing homelessness. You have humanized this work in a way that I'll be indebted to anyone who, leans in this way. So I just wanted to say thank you for, as David said, those are real experiences that you put a voice to in a fictional character. And that is clearly represented in your work. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you both. Thank you, Tamera, and David as well for being here, and you, Julie, for hosting us.
Excellent. Well, with that, I'm going to take us off of Facebook Live and stop the recording. So good night, everybody. And don't forget to click all those links over there.
Thank you.